Welcome everyone to another episode of Raising the Bar with myself, John Cooper, and today I'm absolutely delighted and honoured as well to have such a great man, with such an important story to tell. Walt, how are you doing, Walt? Oh, loving that. Here we go. Now that's the business. That's proper Dallas, isn't it? That's.
I'm doing great. You had to come in off the back 40 to join you today.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Okay, so Walt Heyer, his website is sexchangeregret.com, and Walt is an author, husband and father. Walt has a very, very unique and important story to share as he underwent gender reassignment surgery and identified as a transgender woman, Laura Jenson, for 8 years in the 80s, and in 1990 transitioned back to being a man. Walt now has a passion to help others and to share his story, his wisdom and his compassion, especially those who regret their gender change. How accurate was that? How close was that to
that was outstanding. I'm going to take off my hat and get down to business.
Oh, let's get to business. That was just for our intro's sake. Great.
That was just for the intro. Now we'll get down to business.
Now we get into it. Well, look, Walt, I mean, yeah, as I said before, I mean, you're probably one of the most fascinating guests we've ever had on. I think your story's really thought-provoking, emotional and insightful and informative and life-changing for others as well listening. So I read the book Paper Genders, but I've obviously been aware of your work for a long time now. But can you tell us a little bit more about your story, how it started, just for our audience to know how this all began, from your struggles as a boy with your gender identity issues, and then how it led to you effectively transitioning, then detransitioning?
Yeah, I'll be happy to do that. In that book you're talking about, Paper Genders, that is an outstanding book.
It is.
For anybody to read because it gives the history and it tells you who the people were. And there's a companion book that goes with that when you get one, you need the other, Trans Life Survivors. Isn't that a great, the zipper really tells the story. So yeah, it's interesting when you get into this because what we have is all the advocates talking about how nice it is to help kids change genders. But what we don't hear about is the consequences. And so what we're really talking about is the consequences of when that happens. And so in 1944, which was 76 years ago, it's a long time ago. I know I don't look over 40 years old, but I'm 80. And so, here's the thing. My grandmother, who was a seamstress, was making clothing, and I was being babysat by her. I was at her house frequently. And I got curious about women's clothing and, just as a 4-year-old would, I'm leaning on her sewing machine and became fascinated by what she was doing. So she made me a purple chiffon dress, a full-length evening dress, put me in it and told me how cute I looked. And so it's interesting when you stop for a moment and think that purple dress, the impact of putting me in a purple dress, I'm still talking about it 76 years later. People need to be aware that it's not benign. It's not just a game. It's not just something you can do that doesn't cause somebody to have difficulty as a result of it. Because when Grandma put me in that dress, told me how cute I was, what people need to understand is the moment she did that, what she was really saying is, Walt, there's something wrong with you as a boy. And if we can begin to understand that we're causing young people, a 4-year-old in my case, psychological, emotional, and social harm by telling them that they look better one way than they really are. So that begins the process of what I call child abuse, emotional and psychological child abuse. People don't like to use that word. But if it wasn't child abuse, why am I still talking about it 76 years later? It's because it is child abuse. We don't like those terms because they're kind of messy and they're hard to get out. And we don't feel comfortable with them. But the fact of the matter is, putting a boy in a dress is psychological and emotional child abuse. And so that affirmation that she used in sort of telling me that I was cuter as a girl, I was more loved as a girl, I was more fond over as a girl, because she didn't do that when I was a boy in cowboy boots. And which I really liked. I liked cowboy hats back then, and cowboy boots. I still do today.
I know you do. Yeah.
So then what happened was that, you know, she said, this is our little secret. So we didn't tell my parents, just kept it a secret while I was at her house. That purple dress stayed at her house. And then I took the purple dress home, and my mother found it about 2.5 years after this started. So I was probably 6.5 or 7 years old. And then when my mom found out what my grandma was doing, told my dad, then my mom and dad started fighting, then you could begin to see what the consequences of the purple dress were. Because then my parents were fighting amongst themselves about what grandma was doing to me. And my dad was furious. And it became a fight between my mother and my dad that I felt like I had caused because it was a secret, that I kind of broke the secret. So I felt responsible. And then my dad, you know, this is in the 1940s, the mid 1940s, he didn't know what to do. I mean, they weren't talking about gender dysphoria, transgender. There were no words for it. It's just a boy being dressed up like by grandma in a purple dress. So he was furious. And so he began in his own mind, he's a wonderful guy, wonderful dad, loving dad, but he decided that the only way he could sort of shape me and mold me into the man that he wanted me to be and that he expected me to be was use a hardwood floor plank as a way to discipline me when I did something wrong. And he was finding more things to discipline me with. Sort of like a blacksmith would take a hot piece of iron and pound it over an anvil to shape it into something. Dad was trying to do that with a hardwood floor plank, trying to shape me into being a guy. And so, you know, that went on for a while. But the next step was that his adopted brother, my Uncle Fred, began, because I was wearing a purple dress, teasing me, taunting me, and sexually molesting me. So now, before I'm 10 years old, Grandma put me in a purple dress, Dad's hitting me with a hardwood floor plank, and I've got an uncle that's sexually molesting me. What does a 9-year-old do with that? I mean, I did not want to be who I was. I mean, you can understand that. Why would you want to be the boy who was put in a dress, beat on by a hardwood floor plank, and sexually molested? So what's instructive is, at the time, I did not know much. I mean, what does a 9-year-old know? How do you deal with this? And it wasn't until the mid 1950s when Christine Jorgensen made headlines as a soldier that changed from a man to a woman and made headlines in all the LA papers. And Christine Jorgensen lived not too far from where I was living, in Oceanside, California. And I began to think, that's who I started to identify. Well, that must be who I am. So I was identifying as Christine Jorgens. This must be me. And this is where these false ideas come from. We start to focus on images and things that we see. Christine Jorgensen, I didn't find out till later, was a full-blown alcoholic, died from alcoholism and smoking. And Christine Jorgensen was a wreck, was really a terrible subject to have undergone this procedure, was actually very brutal to people, was an unhealthy psychological and emotional person, but yet made these headlines as someone who changed gender. So, you know, I went on, I was not homosexual. That was never an issue with me. 90% of the people that I've worked with over the last 12 years are not homosexual. The individual I work with are almost always heterosexual men who have identity problems. And it's not a sexual problem. It's not a same-sex attraction. It's not any of that. They just didn't like who they were. They didn't like their persona. They didn't like the way they presented themselves in public. And so we have these developmental things that come up in terms of, you take somebody like Bruce Jenner as an example, would be somebody everybody can identify with. And I'm not saying Bruce Jenner has this, but Jenner would be someone from, if we looked at Jenner, you would say Jenner is suffering from autogynephilia. And even the new person who Biden's appointing to HHS, you know, that person might be suffering from autogynephilia. These are not actually what we would call transgender people. If you're working in the area that I work in, we call them people who are suffering from sexual fetish disorders, and they live out these sexual fetishes in either a transvestic fetish or autogynephilia. Autogynephilia is very interesting, and I say a large portion of heterosexual men who are married and switch genders like Jenner did, and like this new person, Rachel Levine. What we find in this group is that they put on women's clothing. Follow me on this because it's very interesting. They put on women's clothing and look in the mirror, and they become sexually aroused by what they see in the mirror, and that becomes the object of their sexual affection. So they don't need a partner. They don't need a male or a female. They become, their total sexual gratification is wrapped up in themselves, dressing up in women's clothing. This is pervasive with married men who have children, who live what we call a heterosexual life, and then identify as a female later in life. They're suffering from autogynephilia or transvestic fetish. So these are important things to understand. Now, in my life, because of the sexual abuse that I suffered, I had what people call somewhat of a dissociative disorder. It doesn't rise to the level of multiple personalities. But what I've learned is, in working with this population and talking with psychiatrists and psychologists, is that anybody who changes genders, identifies as a different gender, is actually doing what we call having a dissociation. They're dissociating from who they are, trying to become someone who now we know today can never actually be. We know that I learned that you cannot medically become a female if you're a male. You can't psychologically, you might identify as one, but medically speaking, scientifically and biologically speaking, you don't ever become female. You're just living out this sort of masquerade that society has said, okay, well, if you want to identify as a female, we'll accept you, we'll use the pronouns. So in my life, though I had this issue, I didn't know until later on that dissociation was caused actually by being sexually molested and then hit with a hardwood floor plank and cross-dressed in the dress. So I had three major factors that caused me to not like who I am. And this is real important too, is that we have come to the conclusion that people like myself who are sexually abused actually will want to rid themselves. And we've heard these stories where they say they want to get rid of their genitalia. And they want to get rid of their genitalia not because they want to become women, but they want to rid themselves of their genitalia so they won't be sexually abused again. So ridding themselves of their genitalia is not about transgenderism, but it's about a defense mechanism against being sexually abused. Yeah. And girls have reported this to me as well. They say that they would identify as a man and then put on a phalloplasty, or they grow beards like you have, which looks quite good. And, they grow beards and they look very masculine. Well, why do they do this? Many times it's to become unattractive, and to prevent people from wanting to sexually molest them. I have been told directly by them that was one of the reasons why many of these gals identify as a male, not because they want to be a male, but they don't want to be sexually abused. So in both cases, male and female, many times this idea of changing genders is a defense mechanism against being sexually abused. But the gender clinics, they don't care. If you come in and
I noticed. Yeah, in your book, yeah.
And probably one of the most interesting things to me is that, to my knowledge, and to my the people I've interviewed and done over the years, I have not found one person yet that's gone to a gender clinic that hasn't been diagnosed with gender dysphoria. That should tell us how reckless this diagnosis of gender dysphoria is. I even made the statement one time, if I put a rock in front of a gender specialist and I said the rock is struggling with their identity, they would say, well, the rock has gender dysphoria.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, so I mean, this whole idea that everybody has gender dysphoria is total nonsense. What's underneath that diagnosis is somebody who is sexually abused,
Yeah.
somebody who is emotionally abused, somebody who was abandoned by their father or their mother. I've had some of them that I asked them, why did you do this? And they said, well, my mom was in a mental institution. My dad was home, was an alcoholic. I had to feed myself. I was all alone. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to be this person. My dad was reckless and verbally abusive. It was a horrible environment. And I thought if I became a girl, things would be better.
Yeah.
They're not.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, you know, in my own life, I walked through this whole process. I got married when I was in my early 20s. I was married for 17 years. But in trying to deal with what happened with the purple dress, the hardwood floor plank, and being sexually abused, I used alcohol and drugs to try to cope with it because I didn't have any other way to cope. So I overused alcohol extremely. And even while I was married, I was successful in business. I worked for American Honda Motor Company as an executive, but I was crashing behind the use of cocaine and other things to try to cope with what was happening to me. So I went to a gender specialist and in San Francisco, Dr. Paul Walker, and I said, you know, I've been struggling with this. This is what happened to me. I was sexually abused, da, da, da. Told him all these things. He said, well, what you need is hormone therapy and reassignment surgery, and it'll fix it. You have gender dysphoria. So the idea that you can present to a psychologist or a gender specialist a past that has abuses in it, it means nothing to them. I mean, their whole focus is on giving you hormones and cutting off body parts and sending you on your way. That's their mission. They're not looking to try to prevent you from making a mistake. That's my job today.
Yeah, that's why you're here. That's your role. That is your gift on this planet, I believe.
It is. And you know, I've been successful at it. I have been successful at it. I've had people actually write me and say, you know, I was going to go take hormones. I was going to go through the surgery. I looked at your website and now I'm not going to do it because of the stories that you have. So I know you have a lot of questions, so you just ask away and let me answer your questions.
Thank you so much for that. That was such a brilliantly laid out story to lay the preface for everything, you know, because it's, I mean, what you've gone through is so incredible, so deep, so powerful, so painful, so just everything I can imagine, every emotion I can imagine you've gone through. I've got so many questions about this. I mean,
well, let's get to them. Let's
get to them. Let's get to them. I mean,
let's crack open a pint and get going.
Yeah, come on, let's go. let's get it on. All right, so let's start with this. The last thing you said there was very interesting. Maybe I should go off on that one. You mentioned that they have no concern over actually addressing the psychosocial issues behind these the people that are going for the gender reassignment treatment. They're actually, the first thing they're doing is they want to go straight into the surgery aspect of it. Why is that? Is this a political thing, or is it just because they want to gain notoriety as a sort of a surgical rock star? Is it for the money? Is it a mixture of all of those? What do you think it is?
Well, what I know it to be is deliberate. Because if in fact, the only reason why I say it is because I do what they should be doing. And I ask the person this simple question: why don't you like who you are? One. And the next one is, what happened that caused you to not like who you are? Tell me what happened. And 100% of the time, these individuals can tell me what happened, the event that happened that caused them to not like who they are. In my case, being cross-dressed by grandma, hit with a hardwood floor plank, and sexually abused. Those things will cause you to not like who you are. That's what happened. Anybody who had any of these things happen to them are not candidates for hormone therapy and surgery. They need psychotherapy to deal with being sexually abused, emotionally abused, and physically abused. Those are issues that need to be addressed by a psychologist. They're called comorbidities. And so what we have is the gender clinics totally ignore the comorbidities. Now, why do they do that? Because if they took the time to dive into the comorbidities, the person who's presenting these things to them would no longer want to take the hormone therapy or change genders. The clinics would die. They wouldn't be there. Keep in mind how, if you go back, say 10 years, how many gender clinics were there?
10 years ago, I'm not sure, to be honest with you,
Not
but
many.
I'm guessing more now, a lot more
Well,
now.
years ago, there was none. They didn't exist. So what we've done is we've fabricated this idea that because people are struggling emotionally and psychologically, that we can fix them with hormones and surgery to make them feel better about who they are. The actual truth is that it's causing them irreparable harm. And by changing genders, according to Sweden, who studies absolutely every single person, because they keep track of every doctor appointment, every surgery throughout their life, have printed an article stating that everybody who undergoes reassignment surgery is 19 times more likely to commit suicide than people who don't. So what we know is that just by putting them in this pathway to transgender identities, we're causing 19 times more likelihood of them committing suicide. And I might say, there was an article in the UK Guardian in 2004 or 2005 by David Batty, and the headline reads, "Sex change researchers say the change is ineffective." In the second or third paragraph, it states in that article, it was written by David Batty, in that article that people are traumatized to the point of suicide after undergoing surgery. Now, why would we as a society be pushing an agenda on people that's causing them to be traumatized to the point of suicide? Because it's politically powerful. Because this is the way, in the US, this is a political group now. The LGBT is a powerful political package you only find on the left side of the aisle. And the bad people are, to their way of thinking is the Republicans, the Democrats will give the transgender community anything they want, even elevated status. So there's a political component to introducing people to this hormone therapy, and they're now trying to do this to young children. So there's a political component.
And why is that? Do you think that is because they're trying to just grow their political base? So
Absolutely.
That's the reason for it, right?
Yeah, and that's exactly why today, as you and I are speaking, they're letting literally thousands of people into the country from other countries. Illegals come in, they're going to allow them to vote because they know every one of those people coming in is going to be a Democrat vote and not a Republican vote. So they're going to remain in power.
Of course, yeah, that's the way it's going. And so with your journey then, did you find that it was very easy to transition, but when you wanted to detransition, was there literally like no support for you? Was it very apparent, the difference in support levels?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it took me 32 years to get my birth record changed back.
Wow.
Because they didn't want to do it. I mean, I was in court, 11 times, spending thousands of dollars trying to get the judge to reverse things. And I had affidavits, I had documents, and they one time the judge wouldn't even hear me. But he was an LGBT activist, and he didn't want any publicity that someone was detransitioning. So I just detransitioned, and my birth record stayed female for a long time, but my driver's license got changed. I got married. I've been married now almost 24 years. So yeah, that's one reason why I do what I do for free, and I've been helping people for a dozen years, and they write me, I get them 2, 3, 4 a day, whether it's a parent or an individual. Somebody who I talked to on the phone yesterday from our country in Arizona started in the 1990s and said, "Walt, I need help to detransition. My life is no better today. In fact, it's worse. I'm in more distress now than I've ever been because I went through this." And one of the things that they say in their letters to me, this is the biggest mistake I've made in my life. Now I don't have my body parts. I don't look right. How do I detransition? Some of these individuals I have to work with for up to 3 years to help them detransition.
Wow. I mean, it's just, yeah, it's very telling, that, I have to say. And it's I think there's a really a darker energy behind it, a darker evil behind the whole of it, if I'm being honest with you. It does seem to me as though it's anti-life, it's anti-nature. You could also say it's anti-God, a lot of what they're doing at the moment, because they're encouraging people to break away from, stripping people of their humanity, of their human biological nature, and trying to totally invert it almost, you know.
Yeah, and isn't it, I said yesterday when I was doing a show, it occurred to me, isn't it interesting that there's this group of people who want to kill people in the womb? You know, they want to have
Yeah.
abortions. There's a big thing about abortions. And it occurred to me while I was talking in the interview, I said, you know, isn't it interesting? If they can't kill the kids in the womb, they're going to change their genders when they come out.
Yeah.
That's pretty sinister.
Yeah, when you
Think
say it like
about
that is actually really sinister. Yeah.
You see that? I mean, they want to kill them in the womb. If they survive and get out, then we want to change their gender and switch who they are. I mean, this is, to me, total insane.
It is. And it's evil. Let's just call it what it is. It's
It's
satanic.
evil.
I think it's satanic what's actually going on. If I'm being completely honest with you, that's what I think it is.
I agree. I absolutely agree.
And I think, you know, we really need to come together and unite as a species, as a human race, to be able to push back on this, because I think you made a really great point in your book. Some of the terms that they use to push this forward is stuff like compassion, inclusivity, diversity. And I liken this to, if you ever watch the Hollywood movies where you see a fight where they have a human shield. So there'd be like a gun scene, a shootout, and they'll pick up the nearest woman or child and they'll hold it as a human shield. And of course, the other guy doesn't want to shoot at them because they can see that they could be shooting this innocent kid or this woman. And that's effectively, metaphorically, how the political left work in this regards, because they use terms like inclusivity, diversity, empathy, equality. And of course, because it seems so loving and virtuous on the surface, people say, well, we can't argue with that. We can't really push back on that. We can't resist that because it's virtuous, it's lovely. So that's how I believe that's the trick. That's the weapon. It's the Hansel and Gretel of you know, who wouldn't like this lovely candy? Come into the lovely house made of candy. In the Hansel and Gretel stories, it's the wicked witch offering the apple. And so I think we really need to sort of use our discernment to see these tricks, and we can see how this is being pushed, because that's how this whole transgender agenda is being pushed, right? If you argue against it, it's like, oh, well, you're not tolerant. Oh, you're not empathic. We really have to be brave enough to push back on this, don't we, Walt?
Absolutely. And then, you know, they make the truth they call it hate speech. You know, what I'm talking about here is considered hate speech. It's just the truth. Yeah. I've worked with people in the UK. I worked with a gal who was transitioned when she was young. I wrote a story about it. It's in the Daily Signal. I wrote it, I don't know, a couple of years ago. She contacted me for help because she went to Tavistock to get surgery. They won't help her detransition. They won't do anything for her. They're like done with her. And, you know, if you go back and look at the recent court ruling by Tavistock, the judge said, you have not proven to the court that what you're doing to children is effective or even proper treatment. The judge excoriated Tavistock. And it's, if you want to see the article, it's on my website, sexchangeregret.com. I really encourage people to go look at that. It's a great newspaper, the website is. So, you know, it's not just me. I mean, we've got a judge who asked them to bring what they could to the court to prove what they were doing was correct. And the judge says, you haven't done it. You can't prove what you're doing is correct, effective, or medically necessary. It says horrible.
For people that want to detransition, but there's none of that going transitioning though, is there? It's like they have these, what do they call them, standards of care procedure, but it's so lightweight, isn't it, to the point of, you mentioned a metaphor of it, it's just like a speeding limit on your highway. You know, people don't really sort of care much for it. They ignore it. But it's much more stringent on the way. If you're detransitioning though, they create so many barriers for you on the way back, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, they look at me and they say, well, you were never a transgender. Well, okay. Well, then what was a transgender? Right? I mean, you could say that about anybody, right?
Mm.
You know, the fact of the matter is, if you really want to be truthful about it, no one is ever a transgender.
Yeah.
There are none. All you have is people cutting off body parts and identifying as a transgender. But the factual truth is, no one in history has changed a man into a woman. Yes, they've made a man look like a woman and done a very effective job. They've made a woman look like a man and done a very effective job, but give them a biological test. And the women will still, that identify as men, will still come out as a woman.
Yeah.
And if there's ever DNA required that goes to court, you know, they're still going to come out the way they're biologically correct. So, you know, the truth is, this whole transgender thing is phony, baloney, plastic, bananas, rock and roll, punch and Judy. You know, it's nonsense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sadly.
And yeah, it's sadly, yeah. I mean, it just feels as though they want to transition people for more political power, and it's obviously a big money making industry as well. And of course, some of these people gain, you know, notoriety for it, the surgeons. And you know, you talked about some of the key players. I mean, you had Alfred Kinsey. I mean, I had Judith Reisman on the show, a
She's
few
a great
months ago.
lady.
Great lady. What a powerful, strong woman she is.
She's my friend. I've had lunch and dinner and breakfast with her. She's cool. She doesn't live very far from me.
I love Judith, and you know, she opened the Pandora's box to me for the whole of Alfred Kinsey's disgusting sex research and paedophilia and everything that went along that, which actually was the prerequisite towards all the porn industry and the sexualization of adults and children that we see today. And he's the sort of the origins of a lot of that evil that we see. But can I ask, I mean, if people want to know more about the knock-on effect of Alfred Kinsey, they can go and read Paper Genders. But I would really like to know this. What's the connection between sex change and the sex change surgeons with paedophilia? And also, why do these young kids become talks of like this like homosexuality, do you think?
Well, I think originally the men were trying to make boys look feminine. There are many people who are not psychologically fit, you know, because they're pedophiles. If they made them look more feminine, it aroused them sexually more and made them more attractive to pedophiles.
Oh,
so,
my goodness.
Yeah, I mean, they were really trying to put these young people in. We look at John Money, who, you know, the Raymer twins, where he changed one child into a girl, but then in his own research findings in the Raymer twins, both exposed him for the fact that he was taking pictures of them because Money wanted them to engage in intercourse with one another while he filmed them. That's how sick and wacko these doctors are. And, you know, when you look at Alfred Kinsey, he was the forerunner of the LGBT. He actually was kind of the foundation of how the LGBT got started. The LGBT is a sexual, explicit group. I mean, they're about sex. Because if you take sex out of the LGBT, it doesn't exist, because it's all about sex. Yeah.
And also, I'm surprised at the LGBT. Why is it that the T in the LGBT don't have problems with the bi people, the bisexuals within that? That's just a side thing, but it doesn't matter.
They'll embrace them all because they want their numbers to get bigger. So they don't want to split out any one group. I wrote an article, take the T out of LGBT, and it went viral. When you know, people are going, "Wow, you can't do that. You know, we need you in this group, right?" Because you know, the lesbians and gays are definitely gays. Many of the transgender identifying people are not gay. I was never gay. I don't even understand that whole thing.
So did you ever attract the same sex then at any point in your journey, or was it all just a response to the sort of the trauma that you were going through at the time and from childhood?
Just a response to the trauma. And being harmed as a young child. And I find this, like I said, 100% of the time. I mean, I worked with a 13-year-old recently as an example. She identified as a boy starting at the age of 10 years old. The mother contacted me. The girl is now in foster care. And so the mom contacted me. We're going back and forth. And I asked the mom, I said, sit down with her in a quiet place and ask her why she doesn't like who she is. It's my favorite ask. You know, please tell me what has caused you to not like who you are? And the girl sat for a minute, according to the foster mother, and said, I had a bad dad. And the mother said, what does that mean? Well, dad harmed her. See, dad hurt this young girl, and that's why she's in foster care. But during this exchange with mom says, you know, Walt Heyer has some videos. I want you to see them. And so the girl jumped on the screen, started watching the videos, and I get this email from her about 4 days later, and she writes this long letter, and she said, thank you so much for your videos. I am now back to being a girl. I don't identify as a boy anymore, and I finally love who I am. Thank you for your videos. You really helped me. You saved my life, 13 years old. And I've done that with a 15-year-old. I've done it with 20-year-olds and 25 and 35 and 45 and 50 and 60-year-olds.
You've literally saved their lives. I mean, it's just, yeah.
Well, they had the courage. You know, I look at it, I put the information out there. They had the courage to look at the information and weigh it against what they were being told, and found out that I was telling the truth. And they themselves saved their own life. I don't say that I saved their life. I put the information out there so that they can access it, and so that they can see what's going on is harmful to them. I want them to know that I do this because I really care about them. Keep in mind, I have never charged anybody one dime for what I do. The gender clinics are making millions, even governments giving them millions of dollars. In Australia, one gender clinic got $6 million. I don't ask for a dime. I don't even ask that you buy a book. I just want people to know they're going to be harmed by this at some point in their life. And they're going to realize it, whether it's 3 years after they have the surgery and hormones, whether it's 10, 15, the one I talked to yesterday was 20 years later.
Yeah, you're doing some great work. You really are. I mean, it's just, it's saving lives. I mean, just to prevent one life for going through the pain that you went through is just, is miraculous. But to do that with the thousands, the tens of thousands of lives that you're affecting must feel good. Must feel like even though you've gone through a lot of hardship, that your life is sort of, has that meaning now, even though you've kind of been in the trenches and you've gone through that. There's a sort of a silver lining to that journey you went through, and that was to affect millions of lives, you know. So you must take a lot from that, Walt.
Yeah, I'm happy that people will look at the information and they'll evaluate it, and they'll realize that I'm not doing this to make money. I'm doing this to help them understand that there are consequences. What I take away from this is that, you know, we need to realize there's a lot of evil. And then there's people out there that are profiting from what they're doing to young people. I hated what they're doing to the young people, because I was one. I wouldn't be here today if I didn't really believe that I had the ability to help people come out of this at some point and realize there are consequences. And for you to have me on, you have to have courage. And I applaud you for that.
Oh, well, I'm all about truth, Walt. You know, I don't care if I get hurt. You know, I'm doing. I mean, some would say God's work. I mean, but I'm just saying this is my truth. This is what I have to do. This is just that I have no choice.
Yeah,
I have to do. I have to do what I know is right in my heart. And if I get hurt for that, I get hurt for that. But at the same time, whatever I go through, whatever hurt that I go through, is nowhere near as bad as the hurt that these children go through. That's what you've got to look at.
Absolutely. And I think if people read the books that we've talked about, Trans Life Survivors, I know I'm pushing the books. These have 30 stories in it. If you haven't read this one, it's a great book, and it tells you about the consequences. One of them was a young girl who the LGBT changed into a boy and, you know, gave her the hormones. They put her in charge of a gender clinic in a group in an area, you know, just loved all over her, right? She committed suicide. And they asked her friends, why'd she commit suicide? And they said, well, they never dealt with the underlying problems she'd been dealing with all her life. See, that's wrong. I'm sorry.
Yes,
it's a life wasted, because all they wanted to do was fill their veins with testosterone and make them look like a man. That is total insanity. I think the doctors who perform these things should lose their medical license. I think the clinics should be closed. I mean, in 1979, all the gender clinics were closed because they realized it was causing too much harm. Now it's come roaring back again.
Yeah, I know, it's sad. And you know, when you transitioned, did you believe that you were fully becoming a biological woman, or did you still believe that you were only going to become it on the cosmetic level?
No, you believe that you're going to completely change.
Right.
They,
Okay.
they lead you through all this stuff that all they're doing and all this is totally transforming you. And then you wake up to the rude awakening that, the whole thing was for them to make money and for them to foster this idea that they could change people, even to the point to where they're writing false affidavits signed by a doctor said, I just changed this man into a woman. It's a lie. I mean, how do they get away with these lies continues to baffle me. And if you look at the UK Guardian study I was talking about, July 2004 by David Batty, that was so well written. Everybody needs to read that because it really illustrates it. And, there's been all these different brain clinics that have said there is no female brain in men. The only brain studies that have ever showed feminine attributes was in cadavers after a transgender died that had been taking hormones for 12 years. The hormones altered some portions of the brain, but it didn't happen in the womb. It happened because the person took female hormones for 12 years.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, we're getting lied to, and it's just so aggravating because I'm up at 3 o'clock in the morning most mornings or 4 o'clock and answering emails from people who are struggling because these people are making so much money off of harming them. And then I'm left with the responsibility of trying to find their way back. And some of them were actually laying in the hospital when they're communicating with me.
Wow. Yeah, it's quite shocking, really. It's shocking what you're fighting against and trying to help people with. I mean, some of these people, do they go through gender reversal surgery? I mean, can I ask you, did you go through any gender reversal surgery?
No, and I'll
No.
tell you why. Because if you begin to believe and think that doing the surgery changes you, you're false. I didn't get changed. Once I learned that I am still biologically a man.
Yeah.
And once I learned that this surgery was developed originally, this surgery was developed to help men who had genital cancer. And they used the procedure to get the cancer out, but allow them to urinate properly and live their life. But then these individuals saw the opportunity, we can do this to them and say that they're women in a procedure that was used originally designed for cancer.
Right.
So it was never intended, the surgery was never intended to be used to, quote, transition people. It was intended to cure cancers. And by the way, the hormone blocking therapies they're giving young people was never intended for the use to prevent children from properly developing. It was intended for kids who had exaggerated, quicker, accelerating development, and they needed to slow it down. And that worked for them. But to give it to a person who's naturally developing and try to suppress that development is causing them harm to their brain, to their bones. Some of the effects will be, last them a lifetime. And that's why I put the information in my book, Trans Life Survivors, about kids. So, they've taken all of these things, and we talked about terminology. As I said before, I haven't found one person that actually has gender dysphoria. That part's a lie. They have something else going on. They're suffering from depression because they were sexually abused or something else happened. So they attach this word that's fake, saying gender dysphoria, and everybody starts using it. It's nonsense. And then they say, well, they can transition. Nobody transitions. That's also another lie. And the fact of the matter is, the word transgender, it would suggest to the listener to the word that somebody made it from one gender to the other. Well, by its own admission, that doesn't ever happen. So the word is fake.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's just it's trickery through words. It's a linguistic sleight of hand trick to push people into certain directions. And also another one they use is I had this debate with someone that was with their position was pushing transgenderism. They said, "Oh, that's a heteronormative." They said to me,
Yeah,
you know,
I love
again,
those.
that's just one word because they're trying to make it out as though yeah, it's not natural, it's normal, which means if it's normal then it can be changed. You know, it's quite subtle, the trickery there with the
Yeah,
language.
and this thing about, you know, your gender assigned at birth. No, 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 no.
Mm,
Sorry. It was innate and fixed at
mm,
conception, and it
exactly.
can't be changed. When
Mm,
those egg and the sperm came together, sorry, the game is over.
yeah, yeah, I
You
know.
can't change it.
Mm. One of the things they say as an argument is they say, well, what about intersex?
Yeah, well,
And
intersex is, you know, they're not transgender. That's why they have a term called intersex,
yeah,
right? Okay, the intersex people have both genitalia in some cases
mm,
or undeveloped genitalia. That's what happened to one of the Raymer twins.
mm,
And you're at that point where what do you do in terms of how you deal with that person? What I've found with the intersex population is they actually love being an intersex because they don't want to be a transgender. They
right.
will they say I'm intersex, that's who I am, I'm going to stay that way.
Mm,
They will do a blood test and see which is more dominant, either male or female in their chromosomes and genes, and that's the way they'll go. So,
mm.
you know, that's a whole different thing. There's a reason, I always tell people there's a reason why they call them intersex. They don't call them transgender.
Yeah, but you'll see that people that argue that position will use intersex as a way to argue their point, as if to say that, you know, there's no such thing as binary sex. They'll use that
Yeah,
argument, won't they?
except the transgenders, every last one of them have a binary sex and they're not intersex. Sorry.
Exactly. Thank you for just speaking your truth, just like, you know, just as, you know, it's not even your truth, it's the truth.
It is the
but
truth. Yeah.
but thank you for just saying that just so in upfront candid way, because I think the truth is a plutonic force and it needs to come out, and you just have to say it like that, even if it offends people, even if it ruffles feathers. That truth has to be said and stated in that way that you just said it there, and I think we have to be more comfortable with that, and everyone needs to grow a little bit of a backbone with this, because if we don't, then we see a lot of the stuff that you went through and hundreds of people, young children, are going through, until we, especially as the men, stand up and resist some of this stuff. I really do believe that.
Yeah.
Walt, are we okay to go on just for 5 more minutes then, and then I'll wrap up? Is that going to
Yeah.
be okay for you?
Yes.
I was just going to say one other thing is, why do you think these LGBTQ activists say gender is a social construct, but when it comes to homosexuality, that's something that you're born with? Or even transgenderism, they said that in your book, you said that they said there's a transgender gene. Like, surely that's an obvious double standard, an obvious, you know, hypocrisy there.
Right. I mean, we should be able to see through these totally false information. You know, when somebody, I mean, if you look at that and say it's a social construct, then you take that information and you go, oh, okay, then there really are no transgenders. If you use their own words and say they're just socially constructing these people,
Yeah.
then they themselves have just admitted transgenders don't exist.
Exactly. You just throw it back at them. Yeah, their own logic, throw it back at them.
Yeah, it's like, okay, it's a social construct. That means anybody can identify anything they want. It
Yeah.
has nothing to do with biology. It has nothing to do with what happened in the womb. It just happens to be what you want to do. So then there are no transgenders. It's just a social construct. You just socially identify with whatever you want. They themselves just buried themselves with that statement.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, it's just game, set, and match right there, and they
Yeah.
were the ones that set that up for themselves as well. Yeah, I think it's also worth mentioning for the audience, just if we can give a quick summary of the Reimer twins. You mentioned it just earlier there, but I
Yeah.
think people need to know this, right? So John Money, would you like to tell the story quickly before we finish off? Because I think you do
Yeah.
better than I could.
Yeah, it was a Canadian family brought their twins to. One of the twins was had genitalia that wasn't properly developed, was intersex, and John Money says, "Okay, well, I'm going to take this child and make him a female because that's what they need to do." And he explained to the family that, you know, one twin will be a boy, one will be a girl. I'll change it, and so Money changed the genitalia to fashion a pseudo vagina in the boy. And well, the end result was that Money spent a lot of time in having the boys do sexual activity, taking photographs of it. He did a lot of very sick pornographic things with these children. And one of them died from a drug overdose and the other one committed suicide. He destroyed 2 lives because he engaged in, and they admit that, and they actually caught John Money in his own lies 20 years after he did this, found out that everything that he had said, that he had been saying this was successful, that he was doing the right thing, they found out that, and it was in my book, Paper Genders, that it was a total lie, that he lied in his research, he lied to the nation, just like they're doing today. They're still lying and they're still harming people. And nobody has the cojones to stand up and say, let's stop this nonsense, except for an old man, 80 years old, who is trying to help people understand that you don't need to be doing this. You don't need hormones. You don't need somebody to whack off your genitalia or to stick something on there like a phalloplasty. This is insane. It is totally insane. You know, there was a time when people used to actually feel like kids were important and valuable. Today, they're just an experiment. Just like a lab rat in some experiment, they're going to do this. They don't care about the consequences. But there's going to be kids down the road that are going to be doing shows after I'm long gone. And they're going to point back. I believe with all my heart, point back to, yeah, that old man, he was right.
Yeah. Oh, I don't doubt that for a second. I'm absolutely convinced of that. Yeah, it's so sad that some of these people, they care more for a stray cat than they would a baby, you know?
Oh,
you know,
absolutely.
It's just, I mean, not that I don't care about cats. I love cats, but the hypocrisy where they claim they're so loving and compassionate and yet they'll just happily slay a baby. It's just, or overly sexualized children you know, they yeah, I mean, and all the paedophilia stuff as well. I just think they're so they turn a blind eye to a lot of the paedophilic stuff as well.
Absolutely, you know, and if they can't kill them in the womb, they're going to change their gender when they come out.
Yeah, and that's frightening. Yeah,
is that amazing?
Yeah. Well, look, Walt, I would love to talk to you for longer, but, you know, I've taken up a lot of your time already. He's got the hat back on. There we go, the Dallas hat.
I got to go get my horse, and I'm going to ride out in the back 40, and I'm going to ride on out of here. So it's great to talk to you today. Thank you so much. We hope we saved your life today. We hope we educated some people today. We did not want to cause anybody any harm, but we do want people to know the truth so that they can have a way of balancing the truth against what they're being told. And that's the message here. Save a life, save a child.
And so Walt Heyer, his website is
sexchangeregret.com.
That's it.
Trans Life Survivors book, Paper Genders.
There we go.
Everybody needs these books.
Please support Walt. Buy these books. They're brilliant. I just read Paper Genders, and it tells you the chronology of where all this starts from Alfred Kinsey all the way through to the present day. And, you know, Walt's obviously telling his story and leaving loads of accounts and emails of people that have, you know, said how much his message has changed their lives and saved their lives. So please check that out. Well, all that's left to be said is I hope you sort your toothache out, and please, you know, thank you from everyone. You know, thank you for your brave, courageous work. Continue to move forward, knowing that you're doing the right thing, and you know, you are loved by many people for your work.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate you. I hope to get over to London and sit in your studio someday.
That would be fantastic. We'll definitely have you there. We'll definitely have you here. No doubt about that. Yeah, I'd love that. All right.
All right.
Take care, my friend. And keep doing what you're doing. Cheers now.
Adios.
Cheers.